When you're driven, the need to accomplish a goal is relentless. Hard work and ambition compel you to do whatever's necessary. In my work as a personal injury trial lawyer for 18 years, it's common to meet driven people. Those with drive can have different personalities, careers, or backgrounds, but they possess one common factor. Despite their passions, driven people want to surround and motivate themselves with other driven people. If you want to learn how to overcome obstacles by learning from others, then tune in here. This is the Driven Crowd Podcast. Thank you for tuning in to episode 5 of the Driven Crowd Podcast, fueled by Snelling's Law. I'm your host, Scott Snellings. I hate heights. I really hate heights. It makes me queasy just thinking about being up there. When I was told that I had to climb a telephone pole, stand on top of it, and then jump off and grab a trapeze, I got queasy. I wanted to throw up. In fact, my mind was coming up with all kinds of excuses to make so that I didn't have to go do this. And then I saw my buddy Josh, and he got rigged up, put the helmet on, and started climbing that pole. Now, we'd met the day before and had some good conversations and bonded a little bit. But Josh is a bigger guy. He could probably play college football somewhere. And when I watched Josh climb to the top of that pole, stand on top of it, and jump off, man, I knew my excuses weren't going to work. So I had to find a way to get up there. Eventually I did, and we made it through that day. But and since then, Josh and I have become even better friends. So Josh Dill, welcome to the Driven Crowd Podcast.
Hey, thanks, Scott, for having me. I'm really excited to do this with you.
Absolutely, man. I've been looking forward to it. So start off, tell us a little bit about you, where you grew up, where you came from, and we'll go from there.
Sure. I grew up on the farm out in West Texas, just south of Brownfield, which is south of Lubbock. Went to a really small school, K through 12, all kind of in one building. So I had 2 younger brothers that were in school with me at the same time. Graduated with a class of 12 kids. So really small. 3 of those, I think, were my cousins. So not a huge, deep dating pool there.
I would hope not.
Yeah, absolutely not. And but stayed out in West Texas. Luckily going to a small school, I got to participate in all kinds of sports. I was in the one-act play. I did football, basketball, track, golf, tennis, did it all, right? And not all of it really well, but I got to do it all. And so then I stayed in West Texas and decided to go to Texas Tech and wanted to get a PR degree because I thought that would mean the least amount of math and science that I would have to take. And so got a public relations degree from Tech and always was very interested in sports. Loved sports, and I think a lot of it was because there was times through my high school career where I was told I wasn't a good athlete, and so I wanted to prove people wrong, which became a theme in my life. So right out of college, right my senior year, I got an internship with the hockey team in Lubbock, and I got really enthralled with putting on live events, and never had been a part of anything like that. And hockey in Lubbock is probably not. Something that a lot of people think of Lubbock when they think of hockey or whatever. But,
sure.
Went and did that as an intern, decided to stay on with them. And then I lost my first job because the team went under. It didn't have good financing. And I jumped from that into arena football. And I was like, man, I really want to make a career in sports. And then I had a buddy who was an intern with me at the Cotton Kings call me and say, hey, why don't you think about doing sports tourism? And I was like, I didn't know that existed. So went to work at Visit Lubbock and stayed there for 5 years and kind of got my feet wet and understood what sports tourism was and parlayed that into a job in Fort Worth and started what is now the Fort Worth Sports Commission and was really happy in Fort Worth. And then I kind of thought, well, the only city that I would really leave Fort Worth for is another city that really gets sports. And I kind of said, Frisco seems to understand that, and it was weird that you kind of speak those things into existence. I go, hey, Frisco's got it going on. The same friend, by the way, Ryan, who asked me to come work at Visit Lubbock, was the director of marketing at Visit Frisco and said, hey, man, come on and let's do this again. And came to Frisco about 5.5 years ago and been on a wild ride ever since.
Awesome, man. Well, that's quite the career recap. So tell me this. You mentioned throughout that story that you don't like people telling you that you can't do stuff. Where does that come from?
I think it starts, my parents were here this weekend and we talked a little bit about this. I think it starts with them. My dad turned 18 2 weeks, I think, before I was born.
Oh, wow.
My mom was 17, so I think the first thing they called me was "oh crap," and then I got a real name. But they were told they were too young to make it, to have a successful marriage and then raise a child. And so, especially in my formidable years, they were always like, hey, you're a reflection of us, so you've got to be better. You've got to, everyone thinks that you're going to be this terrible kid because you have young parents. Can you help us prove them wrong? And so I was always kind of driven by that. And then, I think in third grade, I started having some behavioral issues, and it really bugged my parents because they were super worried that it looked bad on them. So they took me to a child psychologist, and kind of determined that I was intelligent, but that I was bored, and that I had attention deficit disorder and all these things. And I had my third grade teacher kind of made me believe that I wasn't ever going to be anything. And so there was just several times throughout my life where somebody, whether they meant to or not, kind of made me think that I wasn't going to make it. And I always use that as fuel to kind of prove those people wrong. And I'm not saying it's the most healthy thing in my life, because I in a lot of ways, there's things that I do today that I'm like, I wonder if my third grade teacher or my high school football coach is watching me and going, wow, I can't believe he's doing this, which they're not thinking about me. They've got their own stuff to do. But it is something that puts gas in my tank, and I've learned to use that as fuel and to embrace it a little bit.
And so that's really interesting, because you hear people like Tom Brady, same thing, right? He still uses his, 16th round draft pick status to drive him to compete like he does. And I mean, talk about an ultimate competitor. You put him with Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, right up there with those guys who are just all in. So it sounds like you kind of started off early on being told, hey, you're a reflection of us. Do you still look at it that way? Are you a reflection of your parents, or at some point did you kind of break out of that mold?
No, I it's funny. I talk about it a lot. I live for making my parents and my grandparents proud. My dad was probably my first boss on the farm, because we chipped in and we sprayed cotton and all kinds of stuff. But and then my first real job was my granddad and we sold irrigation parts. And so everything I did, even today, I go, I hope they're proud of me in that way. At times I probably I think about that too much, but I've just learned to embrace that, I care about my heritage. I care about making people proud. And it keeps me grounded, and it gives me kind of a conscience on, there's things that I go, well, that would be fun, but my granddad might know that. And my granddad told me early on, he said, he traveled the country putting up what was the first kind of irrigation systems for farms called Trimatics. And he said, man, I've traveled the whole country. And he said, everywhere you go, somebody's going to know somebody who knows your family. So act accordingly. And every time I left my granddad, we were in college working, me and my cousin working for my granddad. And he's like, I know you guys are going to go out and have a good time. He goes, be good. If you get in trouble, call me. So that's kind of between my dad, my granddad, my parents, and that's kind of where my value system comes from. And I wouldn't change it.
So you mentioned getting the motivation from people who telling you can't do it. And that's where you continue to drive your motivation from today. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Why do you think that is?
Like I said, I think that there are times whenever it's I watch a lot of documentaries, a lot of sports documentaries, just watching the Bulls growing up and then being able to relive it with The Last Dance recently, watching people reach their pinnacle and do things, a lot of those sports movies and everything else is about overcoming, obstacles. And
right.
So it's almost like it's romantic to me to think about overcoming things. And again, there's times where I'm like, I've lived a pretty blessed life, and I really resonated in The Last Dance with Michael Jordan. There's one part in that documentary where he goes, and I took that personally, and he says that a lot of times. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's what I do. Like, he would invent villains in his own life so that he could go out and crush them. And there would be people that were like, all I said to him was have a good game, and he took that as like, I need to destroy this person, like he was talking about. And I realized, I'm like, man, I kind of do that, and I think that's important to understand that that's what you are, and not let that overtake you. Sure. But like I said, if it puts gas in the tank and it makes you want to do something, you kind of have to embrace it a little bit. And that's what I think it's been fun about Frisco specifically is, it wasn't one of the top 10 cities in the United States. I mean, it's fast growing and everything else, but there's a lot of events that I think we host that there's people go that city can't host that, and so that's where my competitive fire still exists. It's in the sports world, but that's my way of competing every day. So I think that at my root, I have a competitive nature, and I get to stoke that with finding bad guys in my life that I prove wrong.
Sure. Now, motivation, at least for me in my world, the way I experience it, it only lasts so long, right? You got to have Big Mo on your side, but he's not going to be there forever.
Yep.
And so, what do you do when that starts to run a little dry?
I think you delve into other parts of your life, and that's what I've for the longest time I got so much of my self-worth from my career. And so whenever things would not be going real well, it was like the whole world was upside down, and I had to learn. And my wife and my kids help with this, but then other people that I trust in my circle go, "Hey, remember you've got all this going on, and maybe this is the world telling you to put more effort in this basket instead of this one." And it's whenever you find that balance, that symbiotic relationship between work life, home life, spiritual life, whatever that is, it's like all of a sudden I'm putting in maybe a little bit less effort over here, but things start to unlock and doors start to open. And so I'm just a big believer in making sure that you're putting your efforts in the right spot. And then I think that, sometimes, like I said, I have to manufacture some of that motivation for myself. A lot of times it's like I said, proving people wrong. But, then I think just surrounding yourself with people who invest in you and know when you need that little pick me up or that little, hey, you're better than this, go and do that, and having that trust with that person, that's what, that's that little boost that I need a lot of times.
And I think that's so key to what you previously said about having your self-worth tied up in any one thing, right? Whether it be work, whether it be your family, marriage goes bad, all of a sudden, I'm a worthless individual, or whatever aspect of your life. And I'm a huge believer in surrounding yourself with optimistic people who have your best interests in mind and will push you, right? I love it when I'm the dumbest person in the room. I love it because then I have so much to learn. If I'm around a bunch of people who aren't pushing me, who are critiquing me, who are, trying to pull me down, I'm in the wrong room. And it took me a long time to recognize that, a long time. But once I did, and I started filtering those people out and adding the people who, not only give me value, but that I can provide value to, man, it's just like you said, doors unlock and the sun starts shining and my overall outlook is just so far improved. So what kinds of things do you do to surround yourself with people like that?
I think I'm probably not the easiest person to be friends with. I think I'm a nice guy. I try to be funny and have some redeeming qualities, but I put a lot of stock in friends. So I have a lot of people that I know. There's very few people that I call like really good friends.
Sure.
And it's just that. Usually it's people that I know that I provide just as much to their life as they provide to mine. It's people that I trust that can kind of say, like, grab me and pull me aside and be like, "Hey, man, you're really missing the mark on this one," and it not feel like patronizing or anything. And
Sure.
so I would place a big emphasis on people being genuine. And so and I think it's hard to find those people when you're networking is important, but you really have to get to know someone on a deeper level to have that level of trust. So I try to surround myself with people who, like you said, that challenge me. I serve on the board of Sports Events and Tourism Association, and there's another guy in Maryland, Matt Libber, who runs a soccerplex up there that's on the board with me, and we have very different views, but we've become very good friends because I embrace the debate with him, and I can respect him for his views, and he respects me for mine, and we talk about it, and it doesn't get personal. So I look for that in people. People give me constructive feedback, people who will build me up and tear me down when I need to be torn down a little bit. I think that balance is something I need. And a lot of people are uncomfortable with providing feedback that's maybe not all rosy. I don't need somebody telling me I'm great. My mom does that a lot of times. But, my grandmother does that probably more than anything. She tells me I'm great. But my mom is the person that's like, especially in my marriage, it's like, have you thought about this from your wife's perspective? And I'm a feedback whore. I ask for it from everybody. I'm like, good, bad, ugly, tell me about it. And those people that buy into that, those are the people that end up staying in my circle.
And so have you always been like that? I mean, I know when I was a little kid, I didn't want to hear what I did wrong. I didn't want to hear I could get better. My dad would take me out skeet shooting, and I'd be terrible. And my dad was really good at it, and he'd be like, "Hey, you're doing this. Fix this." I'd be like, "No, he didn't know what he's talking about."
Yeah.
Even though he's the one who shot 500, 5,000 straight skeet, whatever.
Sure.
But as I got older, I started realizing, hey, I really don't know it all. And if I would get rid of this chip on my shoulder, if I would recognize that people are trying to help me, then, man, once again, light bulb goes off. And, hey, I really do want this. I crave this feedback. I want to know, hey, where can I get better?
Sure.
So have you always been like that, or is that something that you had to develop too?
I know. I think it comes with maturity. I mean, I think, especially whenever, you spend a good part of your younger life getting told all the things you do wrong and not really getting told the things you do right. You do kind of reject feedback initially, but you kind of become numb to it. I think it was, there comes a point where you start to realize, like, hey, I want to be better. And what I've realized, and it's something that I try to use whenever I'm talking to other people, is I learn from hearing people who say, hey, I didn't do this right. Let me tell you where I messed up. Because I think in so many cases there are people who go, hey, I did this right. And I think Frisco does this to certain other cities. Like, hey, we got all these things right. Whenever I talk about Frisco, I go, yeah, we've got it going on. But here's the things that we didn't do right. We messed up. We took missteps. And here's how we overcame those things. So back to kind of that theme of like being romantic about overcoming challenges, I just learned a lot from people saying, hey, I made this mistake. I want you to learn from it. And I have two younger brothers, and especially my youngest brother. That was one of the things that I felt like I was for him. Is I was a bull and went through a lot of walls and got bloodied, and maybe I cleared a little bit of a path for him by going, hey, I made this mistake. Don't do it. I'm just real open with my mistakes, and so I appreciate other people who are the same way.
Well, I think it helps us to be authentic, right? And I think the more authentic you are, just the more people that you're trying to drive into your circle, the right people are going to come, right? Because we all want to be authentic. We all want authentic people in our circle. Nobody wants somebody who they can't trust or, oh, wait, that's not really who he is.
Sure.
So how do you use that kind of openness to, like, hey, here's how I messed up. Here's what I could be doing better. How do you use that with, or I guess from a leadership position?
I just like I said, I'm really open and honest. I try to cultivate a relationship with people. I know there's certain people that don't, like I said, that maybe may not react positively to me being as open and honest. I love stand-up comedy. I love raw things, and I know sometimes that just really makes people uncomfortable. So you kind of gauge that with people, but like with the current staff that we have, I try to have a real personal relationship with people. I want them to be able to tell me things that's bugging them, but I usually lead with, hey, can I talk to you about something? Which I think in some places, especially maybe in city government or more government related, you don't talk about certain things. I'm probably an HR nightmare. I'll just say that. But I feel like you break through those barriers and you get real whenever you can say, hey, let's close the door. Let's be honest. And you can say anything to me at this moment. I may not be able to fix it, but I can tell you if I feel the same way or things that how I've dealt with it. And so you learn to read people, and you learn to go, okay, I can do that with this person. I can't with this person. And then that's where your circle kind of begins to grow. And I feel like, being a leader is not telling someone to do it. Being a leader is all about caring about other people on a deep level. And, you can care that they provide a value to you and your business, but if you don't care about what value they're getting, it's always about getting more than you're giving,
Right.
And, or I say that's in reverse. For me, leadership is about giving more than you're getting.
Sure.
So if I can, and it's not always salary or benefits, sometimes it's just that feeling of significance or that feeling of, what I do really matters. And I think a lot of times we miss that step because we're seeking bottom line enhancing things. But if you, like we talked about before, you hire good people, get out of their way. We don't hire good people to tell them what to do. We hire good people so that they can do what they know and they can tell us what to do. I think that was said in another one of your podcasts. That Steve Jobs quote is something that I remind myself of constantly.
Absolutely. Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. Amazing book. Spot on to that topic.
I learned that, by the way. My dad was a deacon in our church, and we were in charge of, and I think this is partially where some of my event-driven stuff is we were in charge of the potlucks and things like that. And my dad was like, we are going to be the last family through this line because everybody else is going to eat. We're here to serve those people. And that's just something, I learned that really early on. And when I run events, I'm not the first person at the hospitality tent grabbing a bite. I'm usually making sure everyone else is taken care of. And I think that, like you said, that's a big part of leadership. And I love Simon Sinek. He's a brilliant guy.
He really is. Just the service first mentality when it comes to leadership, I think, is huge. One of the things that, to your previous point, is I think people a lot of times, when we tattle on ourselves, we get in trouble, right? Like when you're a kid and you tattle on yourself, you get in trouble. And I think people are just worried about getting in trouble. And so one of the things that we do right off the bat is say, hey, look, if you screw up, you will get in trouble if you don't come tell us about it so that we can fix it and figure out, okay, hey, how did we not train you right? Or where's our system broken to allow this to happen? Or, hey, do we need to fix something else? Because clearly, you didn't do this intentionally. If you did, then we got something else to talk about.
Yep.
But if you didn't do it intentionally, then that means something's broken. And that starts with me. What did I fail to teach you, or how did I put you in the wrong position, or whatnot? And I think if we start from that position, then it frees them up to then say, well, okay, I could have done this better, or, I didn't have the right attention on this, or I just flat out missed this. Okay, cool. How do we prevent that from happening again? And then you're working on fixing a problem.
Yeah.
You're not working on discipline, right?
And see, I think that parents play such a key role in that mentality because for me, that whole mentality started when I was having behavioral issues at school. My mom told me, she goes, if you tell me that you got in trouble versus me finding out, the punishment is going to be much less. So she created that environment where I needed to be open. I needed to come home and say, share my shortcomings. We drove to and from school. We lived out on the farm, and so we had, I was actually a competitive power tumbler for almost a decade, and so we drive 45 minutes to the gym, and that was a chance for me to talk to my mom and tell her, here's where I messed up, here's what went on, and we just kind of developed this. And of course, she was younger too, so she had the energy and everything else to be a part of that. But I just remember, like, if she ever walked into the school and someone grabbed her and said, let me tell you what Josh did, I was going to be in big trouble. And so, if we can teach parents to not just teach their kids about, stay out of trouble, but do the right thing, and, let us be a part of building that, the school system and the law enforcement system, or, the judicial system, should not be the only basis for right and wrong in a person's life. It starts at home. And I feel like that my mom's philosophy on talk to me, tell me about things, and giving me that forum to be honest and have have an honest conversation about things. She brought this up this weekend. I had a principal, and I remember, she went and met with him about some behavioral issue that I had, and he told her, he said, he doesn't always come home and tell you the truth. And my mom was super offended by that. And she said, you're not going to tell me, I know my kid probably is going to tell their side of the story, but my son's not a liar.
Right.
And so, and in that moment, I was young, but my mom stood up for me against, the biggest authority figure in my life at that time, which was the school principal, and kind of taught me, like, no, like, Josh is going to come home and tell, so he's going to tell me his side. And I have the right to listen to him and to listen to you. And my dad has always been famous for saying there's three sides to every story. And it's just one of those things I think about all the time. There's your side, my side, and the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Right. That's fantastic. I had a similar thing happen with me where I may have gotten into a little scuffle at school, and my dad comes up there and, he listens to everything, and he looks at me and says, what happened? And right there, and I think the principal was a little taken aback that he didn't just take her word for everything. But, when I was in the wrong, he made sure that I knew it.
Yeah.
And, we had rules in the house, and there were certain rules that you just did not break. And if you did, then, you had some significant repercussions. Sure. So how do you deal with failure, right? We talk a lot about failure these days, and, in both of our jobs, I'm sure you see people who fail at stuff, and it will absolutely break them.
Yeah. Having a job in recruiting sporting events and every, sort of an element of selling, I think you have to learn to become okay with failure. Once I figured out that every failure had some sort of learning opportunity in it, I read a book about sales, sales autopsy, like figuring out what went wrong. And once you realize that you can learn from failure, I think it becomes a lot less scary. It doesn't mean that it doesn't drive me. I'm very strategic. I don't ever want to, I want to be as efficient as possible. I don't want to take a misstep. But then at the older I've gotten, I've realized, somebody told me, your career is not a straight line. Whenever you graduated college, if you ended up being what you thought you were going to be at the end of your career, you're the exception and not the rule. And so it's just, it's led me to kind of embrace failure. And, there's been times with certain situations with employees and things where I didn't react the way I should have. And what amazes me is that, I'm thinking of one specific incident with someone I work with currently. I have a better relationship with that person because of that failure. Because I went in, I didn't handle myself the best way. She came back at me. We had but we grew from that. Mm-hmm. And so once you start to see that failure is not the end, failure is the beginning, it changes your perspective on things. So then you start, to be an entrepreneur, obviously you gotta try some things that don't work. If you're scared of failure, you're never going to try anything. So you kind of learn to embrace it, and you try to figure out what's the silver lining. There's a lot of jobs I didn't get that I thought was going to be the end all be all for me.
Right.
And then looking back, always, I go, man, I'm really glad that it worked out the right way. God had a yes for me that was better than the yes that I thought I wanted.
Absolutely. Yeah, growing up when I didn't make the A or I didn't, get the whatever I was after, it hurt, and kind of my self-worth partially was tied up in those things. And, obviously being a trial lawyer, like if we don't win, that's bad, right? We've had somebody who has trusted their personal injury claim to us, and we take that personally throughout the whole office, right? If they've put their trust in us, we're going to do anything and everything we can. That being said, we try new things, right? Sometimes those things work, sometimes they don't. But that's how we get better. That's how we constantly improve. After every case, regardless of the result, we sit down and we do an autopsy. And I usually start. I say, hey, here's the things that I'm aware of that I didn't do very good or that I think I could do better. And we'll start from, the very beginning, voir dire or even pre-trial, and work our way all the way through. And we encourage everybody, like, hey, look, you know what, that didn't work or that didn't play well. And, I guess that could be considered a failure, but here's how we can improve it next time to where it will work.
Sure.
And so, I think by approaching that, it frees people up to go out there and try new things. And that's how you get better. That's how you get to be the absolute best, is by trying these new things. And, they call it failing forward, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Doesn't make it hurt less.
No.
It still hits the pride, it still hits the ego, but hey, you know what? I just got better. Yeah. And, one thing that we always make sure everybody does is own it, right? You have to read Extreme Ownership if you're going to come work for Snelling's Law. And one of the main reasons being is got to take responsibility.
Well, but it helps if the person at the top is leading with their own failures. It creates that environment, that trusting
for sure
environment where people go, okay, I can admit that I didn't do everything right. I mean, I've worked in places where you felt like you were, in a fishbowl, and every little mistake was something that was magnified. And whenever I do speaking engagements or I talk about, some of the things that we're doing or things that we've done right, I usually lead with the thing that I did wrong that led to the thing that ended up being right. So, I think that's crucial to setting people up to not be afraid of failure.
So tell me this, when someone comes to you and says, Josh, we have this Frisco Bowl coming in a couple of days, and this entire hotel is canceling everything because they've been in, COVID, right? Mm-hmm. We can't have anybody because we have to clean for COVID. There's no more hotels around. Kind of an oh crap moment. How do you work through that?
I mean, you kind of got to try to slow everything down a little bit. Being reactive is kind of the worst place to be in sometimes. And So, for me, it's exhausting, but I spend my whole life putting on events, being proactive and thinking about worst case scenarios, which my wife and a lot of people around me is always like really tired of me going, hey, this is how this could go really wrong. And then nothing happens. And I go, well, that's a win. And they're like, yeah, but you spent so much time worrying about what could go wrong. Like, yeah, that's my job. That's what makes me good at that is anticipating the worst possible thing. I think you've for me, it's a personal thing. I have good relationships, I think, with most of our hotels. So instead of going, firing emails back and forth, let's get on the phone. Let me come over there. Let's talk about what happened, and then let's come up with a contingency plan. It's happened a couple of times, even recently, where things just kind of get dumped in your lap, But for us, I think in Frisco, and everywhere I've been, I think in the sports tourism world, we've developed a reputation of being people who can quickly adjust. Especially during the pandemic, we relocated a ton of events from around the country, brought them to Frisco because Texas was open. But one of the things, I'll give you an example. USA Hockey needed a place to host their International Ice Hockey Federation Under-18 World Championships. They were in Michigan. That Michigan had won the bid years and years ago, and then COVID happened, and they were like, we can play, but we can't play in Michigan because of the regulations. And the Stars were great at seeing that opportunity and going, let's move it here. But they got on site, and they had ordered masks. They had reached out and asked about some masks, and we had done some digging and got some pricing. And they were like, "No, we found a discount retailer. We got a bunch of masks. I think it was like 10,000 masks." And then they arrived and they opened up the box, and it was like not for medical use. And they were like, "Oh, what do we do?" And so that's because of the preparation and because of the I think I called Daniel Ford, and I said, "Hey, what masks does the city have on hand in a warehouse that we could either they could buy from us at cost and replace all that?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, we have 100,000 masks." So, I think at one point they had 1 million masks in because the city used them so much, and especially police and fire. And so it's more just about slowing down and going, "Hey, what's in my Rolodex?" I know that's an old term, but what are those things that I go to the people that I go, we can fix this. Let's not let anything overwhelm us.
Sure.
Which is hard, but especially in live events. But I always talk about with sporting events. Once I get to the national anthem of the event, when they're playing the national anthem and teams are on the court or on the ice or whatever, I go, okay, my part, everything else is reactionary at this point. I've done the proactive part to get us to this point. So the national anthem is always a nice moment for me because it's honoring our country, but at the same time, it's like,
that's your deep breath.
Yeah, exactly.
So being the doomsdayer, right, having to plan for all the contingencies, and I've seen this with you, how do you allow kind of the visionaries or the idea people around you to thrive without just constantly shooting holes in everything they're trying to do? Because a lot of people can't make that work, right? There's a whole bunch of visionaries or idea people out there who aren't thriving because they have the doomsdayers saying, well, we can't do that because X, Y, Z. So how do you manage that relationship?
It's tough. Like, it's hard on me because I try to live in a real realistic world, and so that does limit me sometimes in going, this pie in the sky idea, I usually dismiss it pretty easily. But I think that our leadership Frisco class, shout out to class 25, but that was something that I got to work on through that process because I was the guy that said, hey, this may not work. And I was vocal, but then I started to realize some people are dreamers and you need to let them dream. And I think back to one of our projects that we kind of noodled around and thought was going to be our project. There were people in our group that needed to run the traps that I had already said, I know this is how this is going to turn out. But if I'd have said, if I'd have gotten mad and been like, I can't believe we're going down this pathway, I provide the input. And then if they're still pushing forward, you got to learn to say, hey, I can be the brakes to a certain extent, but I'm going to burn up these brakes if I'm on them all the time.
Right.
So, I learned that from Bob Jameson, who was our CEO at Visit Fort Worth. I came in, man, I was pushing hard. They didn't understand that they were missing out on the sports tourism game when I got there. And he said, we're not a sports town. And I said, I think you're wrong. I told him that, and I think in our interview. And I pushed and pushed for more resources. Let's focus on sports. When I got there, I was doing sports and a lot of other things. And towards the end, he told me, he goes, Josh, you're the gas and I'm the brakes. So I think that, I look back to that time and go, remember when I was the dreamer, when I was the gas. So I try to remember who was on the brakes for me at that time and try to mimic the people who I thought were the appropriate amount of brakes, and then, I'm really big about going back after the fact. I send Bob cards every once in a while and say, thanks for teaching me. His big thing with me, he always said patience and persistence with me, because I was a bull in a china shop at the time. Still can be a lot of times. But, I try to go back and acknowledge that at the time you were the brakes and I wanted you to be non-existent, but thank you for being those brakes for me, because it put me in a place you probably helped me avoid some certain pitfalls. I think it's important to recognize those things.
That's a fantastic analogy and something to consider for any leadership team, right? Because if you feel yourself with everybody being on the gas, well, you're going to run that thing right off the cliff.
Exactly.
But obviously, if you have a bunch of people on the brakes, you're never going to get anywhere. And so having that balance and thinking through that as you're putting together any kind of leadership team or team in general, I think is huge. And
I think it's important to have leaders who can be both of those things. I think that's probably the harder thing to find, because it's easy to find someone who's all gas. There's people who are an idea a minute, and then there are people who are, and not to be mean, but picking on like maybe, accountants or people in finance who are always like, no, don't do that. But if you can find the person who is visionary when it's time to be visionary and can be cautious when it's time to be cautious, and you can put those people in the positions at different instances to be those different things, I think that's a well-rounded leadership team.
Yeah, totally agree. Tell me this, are you a routine guy?
Well, I told you I have ADD. So for me, I'm kind of this ball of contradictions all the time. I love routine until I don't love routine. And so I start routines, and then I go away from them, and then I go back to them. I'm a big process guy, but then I'm always the guy that's like, well, I don't need to follow that process every time. So, yes, I love routines. I'm really, one of my leadership coaches, Tracy, told me one time, she said, you're really good at figuring out things that trigger you to do the right thing. You just got to remember to keep with it after a while.
You have to invent new triggers every day, right?
Yeah, I mean, and there was a time whenever I was work-life balance, she was the one that told me like, hey, put on a hat when you get home, put on your dad hat, and walk in the door, and then when you're walking out the door, I have a sign by our garage door that says, "Today is a good day to have a good day." And it was like I needed to, it was almost like the Notre Dame thing, like I slapped a sign, like ready to go. But another thing, I'm a big Kobe Bryant fan.
Mm-hmm.
My bathroom lights, I have colored bathroom lights over my shower and my tub, and every morning they're purple and gold to remind me to have Mamba mentality. But then it kind of goes away. And then, I'll find myself like, oh, yeah, I did that. Let me get back into that. So all that to say, I like routines, but I should probably be more militant in following them at times.
I think we all do, right? I think it's tough. Routine, you got to have a habit, right? If you never develop the habit, then it just doesn't matter, because you're never going to keep the motivation. So you got to have the discipline, you got to have the habit to go along with it. And I always like asking people that, because I think a lot of people would have the exact same answer. I started a new routine this year, and that was one of my New Year's goals is, hey, here's a routine. I've designed it out for myself, and I'm going to try for the first quarter. In fact, I just wrote our newsletter article on this, our monthly newsletter. And I'm going to try it out for the first quarter, and then after that, I'm going to say, hey, is it working? Do I need to adapt it? Whatnot? And I tell you what, having that routine in place, and not for a whole year, right? Because that's a really long time, but just 3 months, first quarter of the year, that's a doable goal. And going through that and then going back and evaluating kind of my performance since then has been a really cool thing to watch, because I feel like my performance has really gone up in specific areas, and in other areas not as much. But having that routine has certainly been helpful to me. Tell me this, where do you want to be in 5 years? Or do you think about that?
I do. Well, and I think that's part of what drives my wife crazy, and even my boss to a degree. Is I'm always like, I'm a big believer in short-term goals, but I'm always like, what's the end goal in mind?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always 3, 5, and by the nature of our business, we're booking events that are sometimes like when we landed our PGA championship in, I I guess it was 19 whenever we announced some of that stuff. That first championship wasn't until 27. So we automatically kind of operate that far out. Hotels operate, in the short term and the long term. So I'm a big believer in that. If I had to say, for me, it's like my thing right now is like I want to be somewhere where I feel like my talents are fully utilized. I do feel like I'm a very strategic person, and there are times where I feel like maybe that I could be better used in thinking more broadly about our business or our industry, and in sports tourism or in tourism as a whole. And I guess one of the things that I'm really feeling pulled right now is I want to develop or redevelop and maintain a culture. We went through Leadership Frisco, and I think about the guys at Texas Health Resources. We heard from a lot of hospital CEOs and things like that, and just hearing them talk about how they cultivated this culture, and they have this culture of service, and everybody buys in. I know that's a kumbaya kind of thing, and it's a lot more work than it sounds like.
Sure.
But that is something that I want to be a part of, and I think that comes back. When I worked at Disney, seeing how you could get me as a college kid to buy into making very little money, and then paying Disney to stay in the apartment that they provided, and having almost no money, but being bought into this, like the magic of Disney, the spirit. That's always kind of stuck with me, and so I feel like in 5 years I want to be a part of developing culture, maintaining culture, and really pouring into people who, creating a shared vision and seeing a bunch of people go towards that.
And so let me ask you this about Disney, your experience there. You're a college kid, you're not a higher level where they're really going to pour into you, but yet they had you buying into their vision. How did they do that?
I mean, they're the best at it. I think them and maybe Ritz-Carlton, some of those places, they're the best at hospitality and culture building. It started with us going to Disney as, you had to be selected for this process. And then you went and you got 3 days of, a day of traditions, where you learn the history of Disney and the core values and some of that stuff. And it's like, you have to lay that foundation for everybody. And then those kind of people that can't buy into those things kind of weed themselves out versus going, we're only going to hire. I think you've got to hire the right kind of people. Don't get me wrong. But, when you're hiring that number of employees, there's no way that you're not getting some bad eggs or some people that just will never fit the culture. But, and I think that's something that the folks at THR told us is like, those kind of people will become uncomfortable because we've got a group of people who all buy into the culture. And if you're the outsider, you will either find your way out or eventually, you will buy in. That's the only two options. So Disney was just really good at laying that foundation and then making you feel empowered. I think that's a huge part of getting people to do what's the best thing for the business is empowering them to make decisions. At Disney, we were taught from day one, if we're working in the parks and a kid drops their ice cream cone, you can walk over and go, give me another ice cream cone for free and give it to that kid. There's none of this, I got to get a supervisor to sign off on this. There's none of that. It's do what's right for the experience that kid's going to have. And seeing how that works and how that kind of permeates everything that goes on at Disney, that's why it's a magical place. And so they talked about, they had street sweepers there with, but they told those people, you're not just cleaning up trash. You're a walking tour guide with a broom. And so people would stop them and be like, hey, where's this ride? How can I get to this? And they were empowered to talk to those people. They weren't just like, oh, I got to stay in the back and clean up trash. So the more that you can make people feel empowered to and proud of what they can do, I think the more they're going to give you.
That's fantastic. I think when you have those larger companies like the Ritz and like Disney, you kind of have that huge momentum of culture that people can tend to weed themselves out. In a smaller company, you work with 4, 5, 6 people. Is that right?
We're up to 10 now.
Up to 10.
Yeah.
Okay, still a small company, right? We're kind of in the same boat. It's much harder to allow people to weed themselves out, right? Because that can be culture killers.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you want to get to the place where the culture is so established that those people weed out. But the hard part is planting those seeds and make sure that they grow and that you're pulling the weeds along the way.
Yeah.
Because those weeds have to be pulled. They're not going to see themselves out.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, somebody posted this the other day, and I liked it immediately. It's like, the best way to kill a good, productive employee is to tolerate a bad one. And even though we're 10 people at Visit Frisco, we're part of, 1,800 people at the city of Frisco. And
Sure.
so I think one of the things that's so crucial, and I think the city's going through this, is understanding how they went from, a few people to a few hundred people to 1,800 people is empowering further down the line. You keep giving, department directors and supervisors the ability to go, let me buy into this big shared vision and let me create that in my small team. And if everybody's doing that, it's not top down, it's bottom up culture. And I think that's in city government and government in general. I feel like anything that's kind of institutionalized, that's really hard to do because, in some ways, I think our HR director has said before, it's really hard to make a policy that fits Josh, who's a sports and events guy who travels the country and tries to bring sporting events to Frisco, with a guy who reads meters for public works.
Yeah, for sure.
And so but what you got to do is you got to say, here's the big broad stuff, here's our core values. Now let's empower everybody to try to create their own core values. And that's one of the things that we've done recently at Visit Frisco is we developed our own tourism core values with an eye on the fact that the city still has core values that we subscribe to. And then I think that's what you do with people is you go, if you have a problem where your core value doesn't match with the core value of this place, that's a problem.
Absolutely.
And you got to let people, if you're asking people to choose between their own core value and the ones that are here, that's going to put them in the worst possible position.
Yeah, I almost think of the companies who get it right as a bowling alley where they have the bumpers up, right?
Yeah.
And those bumpers are the core values. And you don't care how they get the ball down there, so long as they get it down there and they stay within those bumpers. If they start jumping over the bumpers, then you got some big issues.
Yeah.
And I think that's the entire purpose of having the core values.
But the goal, I think, in that same analogy is that eventually someone becomes a good enough bowler that they don't need the bumpers, right?
There you go.
And so if you're, if you put these bumpers up and someone literally for 10 years bounces it across all the way down and goes, look, I'm successful, you go, okay, but let's let you see what happens whenever those protections aren't in place.
Exactly.
So you've always got to be moving towards development. But yes, that is the base. Those bumpers are the bases. Those are your training wheels. But we got to figure out how to get you moving forward without the training wheels on the side.
What do you need to get better at, Josh?
A lot. I've got to. Patience is my biggest thing. I'm not a patient person. My mom used to say, like, I pray for patience, and then she goes, then I realized God was probably, giving you chances. It was testing your patience constantly. I'm like, well, then please stop because I'm not good at it.
Yeah.
Patience is my biggest thing that I need to work on. Whenever I feel like I get backed into a corner, I tend to, I don't accept my circumstances. And I think that's part of what makes me me.
Sure.
But there's times where I could probably do it more gracefully, and just allow people to come along with the journey of where I got to where I'm at. Like if I get to a place of frustration and you don't know how I got there, that's my fault more so than your fault probably. Yeah. So, I think I'm an over communicator. I think which can be a good thing, and it's a double-edged sword. Like I'm too open, and I have conversations that, like I said, probably get me in trouble with HR because I'm just too honest. I'm like, hey, let's be real about this. So I think I'm working on all that, but definitely those are the things that I would point to immediately.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. I need to be more patient too, and it scares me to death to pray for more patience because then I just get opportunities to learn to be more patient.
Exactly. Yeah. I need to be more patient, but at the same time, I don't want to lose that drive. Like the show, The Driven Crowd. If it really is what makes me, I've got to figure out how to manage it, and that's how I feel about mental health, whether it's medication or therapy or whatever. It's like, you've got to find the right mix that works for you because you're an individual. I don't take medicine for my ADD every single day because some days I need to be spontaneous. Some days I need to be, I need to connect with people. And whenever I'm on that, I'm like laser focused.
Right.
But for 20 years, I've used medication to fit what I was doing that day. And because I'm not somebody that's going to take it every single day, because I don't want to be the same person every single day. I need to be a chameleon sometimes. And so I think it's just important to be open and honest about those things and figure out what's your right formula.
Awesome. A couple more questions as we finish up here. Favorite book? And you can split it up into business book and non-business book if you want to.
Yeah, so my favorite business book that I've read is The Energy Bus by John Gordon. I'll give you two. I know that's probably cheating. The Energy Bus by John Gordon is great about culture. Okay. I love John Gordon. He's great to follow on Twitter. And then Creativity Inc., which is the guys that started Pixar. And so my Disney background, that as far as managing people and understanding how to put people in positions to succeed, Creativity Inc. is it. I read a lot of John Grisham books and things like that. The 11/22/63 by Stephen King is a book that I read like straight through, couldn't put it down.
I read that last year.
It's fascinating.
It is.
And so I love reading anything. And I was not a Stephen King guy, and yet that book spoke to me so much because it had so much history. But yeah, that's probably my favorite book I've read.
Very cool. How about shows? What do you watch?
I watch The Office every single day. I've probably seen that show through.
Watch it, live it.
Oh, I reference it like literally probably once an hour in some way, shape, or form. We watch a lot of sport. We watch a lot of documentaries on Netflix. Netflix has become great for watching documentaries. Then I watch the stuff that me and my wife enjoy, like This Is Us and some of those shows that are. I'm whether it's music, books, film, TV, whatever. I like things that tell a story, and I like things that elicit emotion from you. If I hear a song, we just went through pre-K graduation the other day, and the lady made the slideshow, and she put like "My Wish" by Rascal Flatts and some of these songs, and you're like, if it makes me feel an emotion, then it's art to me. And so I don't listen to a lot of the stuff, the bro country formula stuff that if you say beer and pickup trucks, then it's a hit song. I don't like that stuff.
Don't forget whiskey.
Oh yeah, you got to say whiskey. It's like the old David Allan Coe thing. You got to say these 7 words or whatever. But anything that tells a story. I love 90s country because it tells a story.
Absolutely. Josh, thank you so much for being on the Driven Crowd podcast. It was a pleasure, and look forward to having you back soon.
All right, man. Appreciate it.